The Business Simplicity Podcast, where leaders share their most successful strategies and the failures that inspired them, so business owners and managers can avoid the suffering and reap the benefits. With your host, Chris Parker.
And welcome back to the Business Simplicity Podcast. This is Chris Parker, and I am so delighted to have Brian Robertson, the creator of Holacracy, on for the session. And we're going to discover what is Holacracy. Of course, I've been doing some research, and I'm super curious. I'm having an opportunity to go visit a company that's actually using this organizational and governance method next week, and I'm hoping to pick his brain and get a little prepared for that. But I'm really fascinated to see how this conversation unfolds. So, hey, Brian, can you kick us off with what is it that you do with Holacracy?
Yeah, we help organizations find a new operating system, you might say. Holacracy is a framework for really a management framework, a framework for how to manage a company. But it's unique among management frameworks in that it doesn't use managers, right? It uses a very different way of achieving order. And I say that's the end of the process. That doesn't mean you throw out all the managers day one. There's a way to evolve that, and nor does it mean you throw out management, right? It's really, you can think of it as management without managers, or baking management so deeply into the framework that everyone has access to, that management becomes a function that's shared, that everyone is engaged in, and that the process kind of just naturally does. So my company and I spread Holacracy. We help people use it, apply it. We have tools and trainings and coaching services and everything else under the sun to try to help people find their path to better management, really, with this framework called Holacracy. And
your own personal journey on that, if I understand right, you were a founder of a software company.
Yes.
And through that evolution. So I'm just, if we go down memory lane a little bit, what was the problem you were solving that evolved into this?
Yeah. So 20 some years ago, the company was started. Before that, I was a software engineer and manager. And, I kept seeing more and more the biggest problems that got in the way of really, really great technical development were rarely technical. They were the human systems around us. They were the organizational frames around us, seemed to be built to just resist change and block all the clarity that we needed. And from a software architect's point of view, organizations are just terribly architected in so many cases. And so I started my own company 20 some years ago now, software firm. And really, I started it as a laboratory. I wanted an experiment ground. My sense was there's just got to be a better way to do this, right? There's got to be a better way to run a company. And this was at the very beginning of the agile movement. And that really deeply resonated, but it seemed so localized with how we build software. And so I was wondering, how do we take some of these principles into the entire way we organize everything in the company and then go further? And over years, we just experimented, right? We tried every idea and technique and process and anything we could find to create, beg, borrow, or steal, basically anything we could do. And we kept what worked and we threw out what didn't. And over years of this experimentation, we started developing a new framework, which we would later name Holacracy. And then later, I left that company to take it out and spread it in the world, although that was never the intent. I really started just looking for a better way to run my company. And when I found it, others started getting curious, and it started naturally kind of spreading on its own. So I followed that, and here I am.
Did I understand you started that company in order to find a better way of organizing?
Yeah, that was my deepest curiosity. And, we needed something to do and sell and build. So we just did outsourced software development. We were one of the first companies doing outsourced agile software development on an outsourced basis. But that was really just the excuse. Where the passion was how do we work together and how do we do it more effectively?
I'm sorry. I'm laughing because my wife sometimes tries to motivate me based on some of my frustrations working with organizations. She was like, well, why don't you just go start something and do it your way, like, yeah, it sounds like you did that.
Yep.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And now I'm curious about your role now. So you're sort of the founder and the face of Holacracy as a movement in some large organizations and small organizations. I think I read on the website over 1,000 organizations, but it must be more by now. Are using this. What is your role now? Are you sort of the evangelist? Are you still researching? Or
Yeah.
what fills your day?
Well, I get to do things like this and share it. There's, I think, something about just the transmission from the source that is hard to make up for with anyone else. Although there are a lot of people out there talking about it now. And other than that, I don't do much operationally anymore, which is exactly how I want it. If anything, have involved in different ventures. I'm an investor. I go out and help other companies, and I do a lot of conference, speaking, and not just on Holacracy. It's certainly one of my core passions, but it touches a lot of other things, and I really love just sharing what I know, sharing how I show up in the world. That seems to have been, have worked for me in some way with others.
In the spirit of curiosity, what are your other passions? Like what?
Yeah, sure. So I do a lot of talks and focus on how to bring more love into business, and more broadly, how to bring more love into the world. I think it's tragic that, if I ask most people in your business world, how many people do you work with? Do you regularly tell them you love them? And the answer is usually near zero. And I think that's just tragic. We spend a lot of our time and energy. How can we build environments where we can drop so deeply into our deepest authentic self and see others for who they are, such that we can't help but fall in love with people? And I don't mean in a romantic way, just in a deeply seeing and knowing way. So I do a lot of that. I have a pretty deep spiritual practice of mine, and I'm an investor in the psychedelic medicine space. I help bring psychedelics to the world for healing and consciousness expansion and many other things.
We might not actually get to Holacracy today. This is outstanding. Not announced this on the podcast before, but I'm working on my first full-length book now, called Lead from Love.
It's beautiful.
And it's not lead with love, it's lead
from love. I get it.
And what I've been exploring and discovering through some of my own suffering and learning and growing as a human is that the joy and the gift of work, because you're doing it with other humans, is that opportunity for celebration and conflict and these things that are helping me refine who I am, and discovering more and more appreciation and awareness of my inner self and source. So we're getting to spirituality part of it here, and coming to the point that almost that the governance model or the organizational model or the method is less relevant than the emotional intention for which people show up.
Yes.
And I'm still playing with this. I'm unpacking it. I don't have an answer other than when people are present in a loving, not romantic, but loving, caring, appreciative, opening, curious way, magic happens. And life is just so much more fun. So,
yes. Yes. Yeah, I'm totally with you.
So I guess to throw it back, and we said love is not romantic. How would you describe love then? Like, what is love?
For me, it's a radical acceptance of everything exactly as it is. Right. I one of my mantras in life, when I notice myself or somebody I care about rejecting something or resisting something or pushing against something, viewing something as, bad, undesired or whatever, my mantra is, wait, can we love that too? Is there some way we can embrace that and say yes to that and just celebrate it exactly as it is? And this is something I think it's easiest for us to see this with other people. If you want to change someone, well, do you know them and do you love them? Because if you don't know them and you don't love them, of course they're going to resist you changing them. And if you get to know them so deeply and love them so purely that you no longer have any desire for them to be any different than exactly as they are.
Why would you change? Yeah. Or why would you need them to change? Yeah.
Exactly. And ironically, in that space is the space they're most open to having you help them change into the next version of themselves. Right. So if you want to help someone change, the fascinating paradox of it is, can you love them so purely that you no longer want them to change? Because that's the moment where you can actually most help them change. But it's no longer to meet your goals, to meet your desires. It's to help them grow into the next version of themselves. And the same is true with systems, right? If you want to change the system around you, the way the society works, your company works, or whatever, the best thing I can tell you to do is fall in love with it exactly as it is, with so much appreciation, see the beauty in it, that you no longer want to change it, because then you're most powerful at actually helping it change. And, so when I think of what do we mean by love in this sense, to me, it's this complete, total acceptance, seeing the inherent perfection of everything as it is. And that's not to say, don't hold boundaries for yourself in certain cases. It's not to say, but you can do that from a ground that is acceptance, that is kind of a radical yes to everything that is and that's showing up, even as you follow your impulse to flow. And sometimes that involves shifting and changing, but it's with delight, not resistance. It's with joy, not frustration. And I want more of that in the world. I want more of that in companies. I want more of that
as well.
Yeah. No, that perfect exactly as it is.
What I seek to practice is what I used to call like radical non-judgment, but I've learned just now that just the radical appreciation, because I already used that word, before, but hadn't connected the dots. I guess it works for yourself as well, meaning at least it resonates with me that does, the more you embrace and appreciate your perfect self now, for me at least, that creates the space where I'm actually in the most calm, I guess, I don't know, open to shift.
Yes.
And what I find, and maybe sort of the anti-patterns of this is, if people rage against the machine, rage against injustice, rage against myself, in that state of rage, there's the opportunity for true reflection and discovery is basically zero.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd even say that when we're in a mode of pushing against and judging and frustrated with something out there, it almost always reflects something we're not comfortable with in here, even if it's just the feeling that thing out there elicits in me, right? Like, I don't like the way it feels sometimes to feel something out there the way it is. So I try to change it, but it's really trying to solve my inner feeling, the way that feels to me. It sucks. So instead, if we can kind of turn that around, and the advice I usually give is, don't try not to feel like it sucks or the pain of it or whatever, because that's just rejecting more of your own inner experience of it. Instead, love that you hate it. Don't try not to hate it. Just love that you hate it, right? Get into that total acceptance of your own frustration and let yourself really be in it and feel it. Like, yeah, that thing really sucks for me, and it's driving me nuts, and it's painful, and I want to change it. And just love that about yourself. Because with that, you shift the energy. You're no longer in a reject and resist your own emotion about it, right? Then once you kind of ground in that yourself, you just love that you hate it. Then suddenly you can dissolve the hate it, but not because you're trying to push that away anymore. It's shifting from a reject energy to just to be with and accept and notice. All you have to do is notice that and then celebrate it and love it in yourself.
I think it's the awareness, because it's in order to love that tension within you, there's an awareness of tension.
Yeah.
I turned 50, well, I don't know, half a year ago. And part of me feels that some of these discoveries, or this awareness of what we're speaking of, sort of comes through wisdom, maybe different horizons of life. But do you think this is teachable? Is this something that you can enlighten people about, or is this something that's just a step on the journey, or both?
What I find is teachable is not exactly the frame I take. It's not something you can intellectually transmit, right? Like, or rather, sure, you can. Somebody can intellectually understand what I'm saying, but that doesn't actually shift anything. It's more of a transmission. I find what I can do. This is actually the pattern that happens in a lot of times where I'm doing a Q&A on stage or something. Someone will ask me, what do I do about, these managers who are resisting this change effort? And I feel the frustration. And the form of my answer is, let me show you what it feels like to love them. And so it's letting them, it's me getting into the energy of like just deep appreciation for them and their world and the complexity I imagine they're in. And like, man, how do I just celebrate them and love them exactly as they are, and letting people feel that in me. Right. So it is more of this energetic transmission. Or when it's, I do some coaching with friends, and when it's somebody rejecting something like a part of themselves, like a friend of mine the other day was just frustrated with how much fear he would feel and how it would get in the way. And so I went into it with him and showed him like, well, wait a minute, like I freaking love your fear. Let me share with you how beautiful I see your fear. But it wasn't the words, it was letting him feel me loving that part of him until he can say, oh, well, maybe that fear isn't, the worst thing. And then, well, wait a minute, can we go further? Can we just celebrate it? Look what it does for you. It's part of you. But it's really an energetic thing. It's let me feel that energy and let him feel me feeling that until he can kind of bring it into himself and say, oh yeah, this is a really badass part of me. Hell yeah. And when it doesn't own me because I'm unconscious of it and rejecting it, I can actually use it and harness it. And it's a superpower, and that is transmittable. It's not teachable, but it's transmittable, and to me, that's how you spread this.
But what you just demonstrated, it's transmittable through dialogue and through appreciation and acceptance. There's a
and through empathy, for that matter.
Empathy. Okay, let me grab on. I don't think we're going to get to Holacracy today. Let me grab on empathy, because I think there's a couple dimensions of empathy that what I seek to do is be highly empathetic, but don't allow others' energetic state or emotional state infect me without, I guess, my conscious permission. Of course you're human. So you're, well, I don't know. I feel I'm human and I'm never perfect at that, but how to be present in the face of, let's call it trauma or sorrow, rage, and be consciously empathetic of that, yet not get sucked into it. And
to me, that goes to the other side of this is your own ground. How do you just stand so strongly and firmly and clearly in your own ground that you can let somebody deeply affect you and know that you've got your ground? So it's not just about a filter. If you have the filter of I'm not going to let you affect me, you lose the empathy. But if you say I'm going to let you completely affect me, and I'm going to stay so damn grounded in my own just root, my own strength, my own energy, that I can let somebody break my heart, and then the next moment I can move on because I have my ground and I can come back to it. So to me, it's actually more important that we can just instantly come back to our ground, because then we can let somebody completely infect us, break our heart open, right? And then the next moment I know how to come back to my ground. Bam, back to my ground, move forward. I learned this to some degree from my mother's hospice nurse, and she would talk about going into a patient to do that work well. It was mostly, in the way she did it, psychological work. It wasn't spiritual work, really. The medical part of it was tiny. And she would, be able to just go into tears, crying with a patient, like feeling them. And the next moment, bam, back to her ground and on to the next thing. And it wasn't lingering. There was no lingering impact on her. Right. And this is how I don't always show up, but I aspire to. I want to be able to feel somebody's pain so much that it can move me to tears even before them. And then, bam, back to my ground, back to the next thing. I'm fine. That's my practice.
I like that refining. It's not a shield. And the most profound moments I've had is being in the flow with the person, yet still being very solid. So let's continue down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Love, spirituality. So is there a spiritual, and I guess you use the word spiritual, not religious, but I'll let you define that. Is there a spiritual theme here, or are these things related, or are they the same for you?
Yeah, I mean, I always struggle with the word and definition spiritual. From my point of view, well, what's not? I mean, it doesn't seem to be a very useful distinction for me, just because like I don't get what I wouldn't see as spiritual. You know, it can be I don't know. To me, I guess I'd say it's more of an orientation to just noticing awareness, noticing consciousness, noticing my heart, noticing this presence of love in everything I can touch it in. You could call that a spiritual orientation to life. I don't mean a specific lineage, although there's many, and all of them can help you touch that. I have friends with all different religious lineages. I don't have any particular one that has influenced me. I've studied tons and have little bits and pieces I've picked up from any number of practices. Probably more the Eastern ones for me than the more Western ones. But there's whatever we're all looking at the same thing. We're all looking at what does it mean to have the awareness right here to make sense of the world and our flow of experience. To me, I would call it a deeply spiritual orientation to life, and not everyone will call it that, and that's fine too.
No, yeah, I guess if we start trying to define these things, that's futile, because plus it's everyone's own journey.
Yeah.
But on my side, I think the awakening, if you will, or whatever this new horizon of my life has been, I can really tag it to mindfulness and meditation in my life, and I've been practicing different things, and I've recently started going to yoga as well, which I imagined was going to be quite a calm thing, but it's really, really intense. Didn't expect that in a really a beautiful way. But that practice of emotional silence, quieting, and then allow whatever to occur, and then basically embrace that over the last years has been just amazing for me. And then I've also been to some, I don't know, Dr. Joe Dispenza, who, if you know the name,
yep.
He attaches some sort of quantum theory to this stuff, which is me a little bit into the woo space. But the physical, the way he's doing meditation is extremely intensely physical, of like holding the body in a certain way and pushing through the energy centers and stuff. And combining that emotional and physical thing for me has been, well, for now, and I'm sure maybe next year that it'll unfold in another thing. Is there any space for meditation in your life, or is that something that's not part of the daily practice?
Yes. I look at literally every moment of my entire life as an opportunity for meditation, if you will, or for orientation of noticing what's arising in my awareness. And I think the more advanced meditation is not what you do on a cushion. That's practice for being able to do that while you're, in a thick of something, especially when emotions are high and strong, and you're, somebody does something that really like hits you and triggers something. That's the moment where you most practice meditation. And this we can tie back to Holacracy. Holacracy is effectively a meditative practice for the organization. It's one of allowing everyone to notice what jumps into their awareness that creates some dissonance or some tension, as we call it. Where do we notice something is off from how what would be a more full expression of the purpose of the role or the team or the company, right? And then how can we respond to that awareness to drive a change through the system? It's Holacracy is, a friend of mine calls it a stealth spiritual practice for organizations. They think they're bringing in, a management framework for operational efficiency, which they are. But the way it works and reason it gets so damn efficient is because it works with human consciousness in a way. And you could even say harnesses that for a certain organizational consciousness by allowing anyone in the system who senses anything in their consciousness to have the right channels and pathways to actually process it, to harness it, to drive change with it. And in most companies, we don't get much help. Most companies don't have much of a meditative process, if you will. Most companies, people are aware of something and then beat their head against a wall and can't drive change with it very easily, or it takes so damn long that they have to pick their battles. And instead, what would it look like if our companies became a practice ground for meditation for everyone without calling it that, without the woo element, which turns some people off, but instead just, helps them practice, just a basic practice. That one of the core things we teach is just notice what jumps into your awareness, and capture it, write it down, and then let's process that later. What is that telling you? Is it telling you that there's a process that needs to be better, or an expectation that needs to be added, or an action to take, or whatever? There's a lot of different channels. And really, Holacracy is a framework for that. It's a framework for harnessing human consciousness and driving positive change with it. So you asked, what's my or where's the space for meditation for me? It's every moment. It's every day. And I love to have frameworks that make it easier to take what I'm noticing in my meditation and drive change with it in the world.
It's not stealth anymore if we publish this, that.
That's fine. I never intended it to be stealth. It's just only so many people interested in this side of it.
Let me just grab onto that. As a form of consciousness and as a spiritual process of to enable growth and enrichment, are there organizations that this is just not suited for, that Holacracy is not the answer for? Meaning, like they show up and they say, "Hey, Brian, let's do this Holacracy thing," and you're like, I think you better go 2 doors down to the whatever.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. One is where it just doesn't make sense to invest in the cost of change. So there is there's a learning curve here. There's learning a new way, putting in place a new framework, shifting from how you organized before to this. And there is a gradual or incremental path to do that. You don't have to do it all at once. And yet still there's a cost of change. And for some companies, it just doesn't make sense to pay that cost of change, either because they don't need it. They're doing so great, the benefits just aren't worth it. There are almost always benefits, but it's not always worth the cost. The other cases, I've seen startups that are just fast growth. They want to build, grow, and sell that company in a few years really quickly. And if they're hiring that fast, it might not be worth slowing down and getting everyone to learn a new way to be. This is more a framework for the companies with a longer term time horizon they're looking at. And the other thing I'll say is when the power holder, founder, CEO, whoever's bringing this in and has power in the old model, when that person doesn't really want it, they're not really on board, or they haven't done that much of their own self-work, this may not be the right fit, right? It's going to challenge that person to really learn a new way to lead and use power and hold power. It's a more effective way once they learn it, but do they want that? It's uncomfortable sometimes, right? It's change. And sometimes you get somebody that really, they don't want that. They just want, they want the organization to be kind of an extension of their own ego. And I don't mean that as a derogatory thing. There's nothing wrong with that at all. If we're transparent and clear, no, I want things to run my way, the way I want to. I don't really care if it's the most effective way. This is comfortable. It's what I want. And I'm building this thing to run this my way. Then this is probably not the right framework for you.
And that's their prerogative.
Totally.
And if only they could make that a bit more explicit as well. And then that would allow people to check in and check out. I think let's talk about making things explicit later, but I want to grab onto this power thing because one of the things that's most fascinating to me as I've been snacking on Holacracy is this whole thing of a constitution where and it's not the fact that there's a constitution because but the fact that, and correct me if I'm wrong, the CEO signs away his or her power, at least in a traditional sense of the organization, to the collective through the form of this constitution. essentially saying I'm not in charge anymore. Now,
yeah. So
now,
a couple
now,
of things.
now, make that make sense for someone who's coming from a Newtonian management science approach. Like how can that possibly be a good thing?
Yeah. So a couple things. One, important to clarify, the power they retain is the power to throw it out and go back to management hierarchy or whatever they were doing before. And that's really important. If this doesn't work better, don't do it. The point of this, sometimes people think the point of this is just to, whatever, be more egalitarian or something. And no, the point of this is to better express the purpose of the company. And if this doesn't do that, go back to what you were doing before, right? So that's the one power they're retaining. So their commitment is, until I make that clear decision, this is not the right framework for us, we're going back, you can hold me to this one, right? As long as it seems true that this is a better framework, I'm in this way. And why would you do that? Well, as I've learned early in my entrepreneurial career, the whole job of an entrepreneur, any leader, is to obsolete themselves in a way. You can't do everything. You need to delegate. You need to get other people doing it. We don't want managers who see some issue and just always jump in to micromanage and be the superhero to solve it. We want the ones that actually create better systems. We want the ones that say, all right, well, what process change, or how would I, clarify the responsibilities of someone else or empower someone else, whatever, what would I do so that I never have to deal with this issue myself again, right? That's how you scale a business. That's exactly what you want. So ironically, it sounds different, but it's exactly what we want even in a management hierarchy. We want bosses that create clarity, right? And then get out of people's way. Create clarity, improve processes, get out of the way, not ones that micromanage all the time. The trouble is that's really hard to do without a framework. It's really hard to do. And there's not enough managers to go around. In fact, when you get a manager who's really good at that, they get promoted and replaced by a manager who's not as good at that, right? There's just not enough of them. And it's hard work. So all Holacracy does, and all that CEO would be doing when they do this, is say, look, I'm going to remove the ability of managers in the system to do the hack of just jump in and micromanage and boss others around. But I'm not stripping away their power to create clarity and refine process. Sometimes people think it's getting rid of that power. It's not. What it's doing is raising everyone else's power as well. Everyone has the power to use Holacracy's governance process, which is defined by this constitution, to update the way the team works, to propose changes to processes and roles and expectations of each other, to propose how things work around here. In other words, how do we evolve that? The manager still has the ability to define that stuff. They just have to go through a process, and one that everyone else is also invited to use on the team, right? And then they're held to the results. Then if this governance process has said, look, this is in your role, former CEO, and this is not, honor that. You can always propose a change just like everyone else, but otherwise honor that. And others can hold them to it. So now it's kind of like everyone becomes the CEO of their roles. Holacracy is a role-based system, defines a lot of roles. Everyone has many roles, maybe in many teams even. And everyone now gets real power to lead their roles and a meta process to evolve the structure around their roles, the expectations, the processes, all that.
Why self-work then?
Yeah.
I can imagine the self-work is because, let's go back earlier in our conversation about, there must be a groundedness of the players in this game to be consciously aware of what's working and what's not working, and then what's feeling right, what's not feeling right, and the tension. And then I imagine there's also, because if everyone has that power, there's a bravery that needs to be exhibited, I guess, to say, hey, this isn't working for me. Where does the self-work come into this?
So there is a bravery when they're new to it, but it becomes so ordinary that it's no longer brave. It's just what we always do. And that's the goal, right? It's, even in society today, things that are completely ordinary that teenagers do today would have been considered massively brave if we go back to the medieval ages, right? So what we want is the act of leading your part in the system, including driving change elsewhere in the system. We want that to be so ordinary that it's something like breathing that just happens, that everybody does it. We don't. I think it's tragic that we have so much focus in our business world today on leadership, as if it's some special thing we need to really focus on, as opposed to something so ordinary that it just happens and everyone does it. Right? I think the right frameworks can instill that orientation to leadership and just make it no big deal. So why self-work? The change is hard, and it's going to require, especially of that leader at the top, they're the one person that can throw it out, right? Like somebody else they can get a new job, but they're not going to throw out the organization's power structure. But the person at the top can. So that means they need some degree of commitment to that change. And that change is going to challenge them. It's going to hold up a mirror to their habitual ways of getting things done, and sometimes challenge those ways and challenge them to evolve them. It's also, there's something Holacracy does with ego. It tends to hold up a mirror to where somebody is driving something more from their own contraction, their own fear, their own desire that's misattuned with the organization's purpose. There's various processes in there that tend to separate those two out. And that can be actually quite confronting when you're trying to do something, and then the process kind of helps even you naturally see, oh, wait, I'm actually trying to drive this from my own contracted fear and not because it best serves the purpose. So the one person that can see that, freak out, and end the whole thing is the founder, CEO, whoever is bringing this in. Everyone else gets to sit with that discomfort and see what they process it into. And it can be quite alchemy when somebody sees something in themselves in a new way for the first time. But it's only alchemy if the person's ready to go through that work of alchemizing it. And that's why the work is in capital W work, their self-work. Is that part of the system, or is that saying, very intentionally not? Okay, this is go do your work. Yeah. Yeah. And that said, Holacracy is the most developmentally catalytic framework I've ever seen in the business world. It will force the need for a lot of different self-work in all different ways. I literally had one woman come up to me after several months doing Holacracy in her company. I was doing a training for the company, and she came up and said, "Oh my God, I finally got it." I got what? She said, "I got it. I got what my therapist has been trying to get me to understand in my marriage for the past couple of years, and I just wasn't getting it." And I got it now. I really got it. And it was about standing in sovereignty as opposed to codependence, and yet in interconnection with her partner. And she had a whole spiel about it. And it was the kind of thing that you get with enough self-work. And she got it in a few months of doing Holacracy after her therapist has been trying to beat it into her for a while. It's an incredibly developmentally catalytic system. But the goal of it is not, let's develop the people. There's nothing in there that's intentionally trying to force people to do work and develop. It's, if anything, it's much more honoring than that. When you take that stance, this is a problem I see in a lot of companies when they have too much focus on let's help develop and grow our people. There's something in that sends a message. There's something wrong with you as you are now. You need to be more developed, grow, and change. And it also triggers resistance when somebody feels like somebody's trying to grow them. That can be confronting. That there's a lot of resistance that can come up.
Well, very, very early in my career, I measured before we talked about purpose, and now everyone has a purpose. But my mission as a manager was to ensure all the people that were reported to me succeed. Mm-hmm. And I completely failed at that, because how do you own that? You can't own that for anyone else. And I guess it's sort of been refined over time that create the space for success. And now what I talk is I just want to bring more meaning and joy into my work and work with others. But with that said, developmentally catalytic, love the terminology, that if an organization wants to be truly a learning organization, I think those are really weird words. The people in the company need to learn something, but that's that is an individual journey. And so how do you create the space for that, for people to check in? And not everyone's wanting to learn something today. Maybe they'll learn that in 2 years. It's so how does it hold that space of developmentally catalytic without being too, I think you're wrong, so it's practicing some sort of radical acceptance and love, while still being firm, because this thing has to work.
Yeah, totally. So one, I love your shift there from help people succeed to create the space where success can happen. There's something there I talk about a lot around empowerment. Holacracy is a very empowering framework, but not because there's an irony of empowerment. If, as a manager, if your job is to empower others, something fundamentally ironic about that. If somebody needs you to empower them, what does that say, right? That they're fundamentally disempowered if they need you to empower them. You cannot empower someone. But what you can do is create space where people can find and use their own power, right? Where there's not obstacles or barriers to people stepping into and owning power, right? Same thing with consciousness. You can't make anyone more conscious, right? But you can create a space in which whatever they become conscious of, they can do something with, and that will tend to reinforce consciousness. So what Holacracy does, Holacracy will solve nothing if you don't have the right people in the mix to bring their consciousness into it. But what it will do is make sure anyone who becomes conscious of something that is in the way of the organization's purpose, or that will better express the organization's purpose, can do something with that consciousness to drive change, right? And that kind of tensions the system. That in a way that's like, my consciousness might realize, hey, there's an obstacle to our purpose or some way to better express it. And I don't have to, that's not a judgment. That's a noticing of opportunity. It's of evolution. And I can then take that into the system, and I can propose changes. And in proposing changes, you're going to have to be part of that process too if we work together. I might propose a change to your role or to one of the processes you're involved in. And now you have to feel into, wait a minute, does that add any obstacles to me doing my role's purpose or my piece of the system or not, right? And so one person starting by sensing attention and trying to drive change ends up tensioning the whole system and requiring pooling more consciousness of everyone, right? And this is the beauty, it's practice, right? This is what meditation doesn't force you to get more awake. Yeah. It gives you a practice ground of noticing. And this creates an organizational practice ground. And that's what's developmentally catalytic about it.
I love it. We are unfortunately running out of time. But I have one more path of questions. And I shared this with you before we were recording. But next week, I have the privilege of participating in a governance meeting with, oddly, one of the largest competitors of the company that I spend my days working with these days. And it's a testament to their openness to allow a C-level person from a competitor to come in and watch one of these governance things. And the question I wanted to ask, really refined through our conversation, how can I be the most loving, appreciative participant in this space, which is it feels some sort of a sacred space, because they're talking about governance, they're talking about how they rule each other and how they balance power with each other. I'm already just humbled that I'm able to come. But do you have any tips or what will I see or smell, and how can I be a contributor in that moment as opposed to a distraction or a detractor?
Yeah, what comes to me is the mind is maybe not the right tool to answer that question up front before the process. Think of it as a meditative practice, right? Go in and just be present and notice what is there. Keep coming back to that presence, noticing what's coming up in you and what you sense in the room. And I don't know, it's one of those, you can't think your way to love, you can't mind your way to heart. I tried that for many, many years. It doesn't work that well. If anything, it's a letting the mind take a background seat that allows other things to come forth. When you're trying to care about a significant other or your child, right? It's not a mental process. It's, if anything, it's letting that background and just feeling yourself, feeling your heart, feeling yourself, letting them move you, letting them impact you, letting what's happening impact you. And then trusting that gut, that impulse, that intuition that comes from that heart and body, and speaking from that and see what happens.
Love it. Stealth, spiritual practice, developmentally catalytic. Well, I was excited, Brian, to have you on, and honestly, for me, this has been much more than I could have hoped, because I thought we were going to talk about a book and a method and Holacracy and but I feel we went in a lot of different rabbit holes, which was beautiful. Thank you for your openness. Really, thank you for your openness. This has been a beautiful hour, not quite an hour. For people who would like to learn more, you can find Brian's organization at holacracy.org, and that's spelled HOLACRACY.org. So holacracy.org. And on there's lots of different, I'm looking at the page right now, there's partner organizations, and there's some training and some coaching, and there's I did like, there's a start here, and in the first sentence of the start here was, I think, if you've decided this is good for you. So let me look at the start here page. But once you're ready, So I think there's, orient, and once you're ready, find a coach and get started. Is that the best way for people to discover and eat this? They can of course find your book, but talk to a coach. Is that the place to start?
I'd say when they're ready to like seriously consider doing something with it, that's a great starting point. But even what those coaches often do is not say, let's jump right into changing your whole organization. It's more like, how do we give you a taste of this? We sometimes do sessions with like a core management team where we just for a day or two, walk them through dealing with their real issues in this new way with some of Holacracy's methods. And that way they get a chance to really feel it out and kick the tires. That's what a coach will do typically to start. Or you can get that at a training. There's various trainings. You can kind of get an experiential, but it's Holacracy is a practice. It's like learning about meditation. You're not going to do that by reading a book, although please do read my book. It adds something, but really you got to do it to get it.
No, I love it. Or in me, I'm kind of faking do it. I'm going to go join a competitor and see how they do it. It's just,
that's great too.
Tasting and snacking. So Brian Robertson, thank you so much. We are going to include the link to the holacracy.org in the show notes, and also to Brian's LinkedIn page at least. So if you need him, I'm sure you can find him through that. So Brian Robertson, thank you so much for joining. This has been really delightful.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Download the Simplicity Toolkit from ebullient.com to discover the power of the Simplicity Scan and Sprint. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite player.